Right, guys, welcome back to something cool. Again, still don't have a name, still waiting for it. So, today we're with a good friend of ours, Liz. She is a user interface and experience designer. She's going to give us a bit more insights on, physically, if you're creating an app or the creation of a website. So basically everything that all of your clients or the users, experience well on your website or app, just to make it very comfortable for them to use and just be hassle-free overall. So Liz, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So Liz, how would you define the user interface and the significance it plays in the overall customer journey?
So the user interface and the user experience, it actually forms a big part of the customer experience. Now, the user interface is the thing that you look at. So that is your buttons, your screen design, how the text is laid out, how the photos are laid out. So that's the visual part you see. And then you also have the user experience. So that's how things flow together. Does it make logically sense? Do the things happen that I expect to when I click on them? Is the information laid out in a way that's easily accessible? And then you have the customer experience, which is a much bigger thing. So if you think of a bank, for instance, a bank has multiple parts. It has an app you interact with. It has a website. It has a call center. It has a physical branch. It has ATMs that you go to. Each one of those is a touch point for the brand that you can interact with. And as a customer, I have an experience of all of those different things depending on what my needs are. So focusing on the digital aspect, the app or the website, for instance, that's a fraction of your customer experience. And it's important to align all those things and get all the people that work on those different parts to actually have the same understanding of what that customer experience is going to be. And your user interface tends to be, nowadays, everyone wants to work on digital. So you want to do everything easily and efficiently online. So it's very important to have that in a way that people want to interact with it and find it easy to interact with.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said if things flow and it has to make logical sense. How would you describe if something does not make logical sense?
There are many examples of that. So you often find, for instance, if you're trying to cancel a subscription, how many times have you struggled to figure out where that button is, or how to cancel an order? Very often it's hidden very deep inside, whatever settings it might be. And in UX, we call those dark patterns. It's things that are deceptive, things that make you do things that you didn't intend to. It is a checkbox, for instance, for marketing consent that uses a double negative. Don't click this if you don't want emails from us. Things like that, or it's auto-selected and you don't think about unselecting it. So things like that, where you can easily trick people into doing things that they don't actually want to, but people design it in a way that can be deceptive. So it's important to stay away from those, because the second that you lose that transparency, that people lose trust in your company and your brand, they're not really going to want to use you, because why would they trust you if you've shown that you're untrustworthy or that you're not transparent with what you're doing?
You also mentioned that it gives information. You said that it doesn't provide you the information you're looking for. What would you classify as enough information? Because sometimes, there's only literally like one sentence and you don't even actually know what's going on. And then sometimes it feels like you're reading through a whole book. So how can you draw the line knowing that you have enough information in a certain section?
That's very hard. It's kind of like that question, how long is a piece of string? It very much depends on the actual context and what you're designing for. So if you think of, say, a banking app, for instance, you can very easily have a lot of very technical jargon, but if you have a lot of technical jargon, that doesn't help the customer actually understand what you're agreeing to or not agreeing to. So it's better to have short, succinct, like user-friendly little sentences that make it easy for people to understand what they're agreeing to or what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you think of something to do with medicine, so say a virtual medicine consultation with a GP or so on, you might need to have a little bit more information to explain how the privacy laws are enacted on that app, things like that, to make people feel safe. So it really depends. But I think the bottom line is people don't read and people don't like reading. So in general, don't throw walls of text at people. Just because you're explaining it over several pages does not mean that people are going to read it. Bring in infographics, bring in little illustrations, animations, record short video clips to explain things to people. You have a digital media that's not static, so use the tools that it can actually give you to make it a bit more interactive, make people or help people to understand how these things actually work.
Okay.
But in short, there's no one-size-fits-all answer for everything, but try and keep things short and succinct as possible and use human language. Try and avoid jargon as much as possible.
Would it be better to rather give information through in bullet points form or in a paragraph? Because I know for me specifically, I also am one of those people that don't read at all. Like I read the back of the book and it seems like a good book and then I put it back. So I think if it's in a paragraph, I'll browse through it. But if I see something in bullet form, I'll read more through it because then it seems more factual. Would you recommend rather using bullet points, or would it rather be better to write a descriptive paragraph?
So again, I think it depends. If there are very important things that you want to highlight to people, definitely bullet points. If you think of something like terms and conditions, I've seen places where apps will highlight if you don't want to read all of this, these are the 3 main things that you should sort of get from this. And then the rest is more standard, like all the things that they need to say. So definitely bullet points help to highlight things and make things clearer, what you want them to focus on. And again, it comes down to being transparent. So these are the things you want people to be aware of that they're agreeing to, or if you're giving information through about your product or your brand, keep it succinct. Make it easy for people to find the information that they're looking for. Like you said, don't hide in a paragraph. People are only going to skim it and they might only get parts of it.
Yes.
So don't force people to work for it. If they ask a specific question, or if they're on your About Us page, for instance, give them the elevator pitch first, and then you can expand on when your company started 25 years ago.
What would an elevator pitch be?
An elevator pitch, when you're actually talking to someone, and it will usually be a 1 to 2 minute discussion about the main points that you want to hit. So the idea being that you're sort of trapped in an elevator with someone, you have the time until it gets to their floor to actually sell them on an idea. So you want to be short and succinct, you want to hit the main points and convince them that this thing is worth doing or important or worth their time. So in the same way, when you're looking at text or body copy on a website or an app, you want to get your point across as quickly as possible. So don't necessarily start with the history of your company and where you got your name from and things like that. Start with why people should care. That is sort of one of the big things that if someone's using your app or your website, the question comes down to why should I care? And why they should care should be your unique selling point. It should be the thing that you can offer them that can make their lives easier or better in some way.
What would you then say is the key elements to a great user interface?
An interface, it needs to be user-friendly, first of all, which sort of sounds like a very wishy-washy word, but there are actual metrics that can be used to measure it. So Nielsen-Norman defined a couple of heuristics. Nice jargony words I'm using, but what it comes down to, if you look up Nielsen-Norman's heuristics, you'll find a list of, I think it's 14 specific ones. And it's things like, how easy is the information to find? How easily are you preventing people from having errors? So, for instance, if you allow a text field, you're asking for someone's cell phone number, and you allow an open text field, and they can type there, my name is Paul. Obviously, it's going to give you an error because that's not a cell phone number. So the question is, why did you allow them to type letters into something that should be numbers in the first place? So things like error prevention, something like showing the state of the system. So if this page is loading, show a loading screen. It seems obvious when you sort of think about it, but it's funny how often people forget about it. If you don't see a loading screen, you don't realize that something's happening in the background. You might think, oh, it's frozen, it's broken, I should exit the page.
It's true.
So help people to understand what's going on the whole time. As I said, there's a number of them. I can't remember all of them right now, but that to me is what makes a good interface. Obviously, it should be beautiful as well. It should have colors that are pleasing to the eye. In other words, don't use very neon colors next to each other because that's difficult to read. Don't use colors that are too bright or too dark so that you can't read things. And there are multiple tools on the internet as well that can help you with this. So the Web Accessibility Guide has some standards for this. And there's also some software that you can use to run your designs through, where you can actually see, does it have enough contrast? Is it accessible enough, etc., etc. So the main thing is try and make it user-friendly, make it easy to use, make it so that people want to come back and use it.
And what would be the relationship between the user interface and the user experience?
A lot of people think that they're the same thing, so UX and UI, but there are distinctly different fields that influence each other a lot. So the interface is purely what you see. So those are your beautiful buttons with the rounded corners, with the drop shadow, with your nice gradient, all of those things, the pretty things that you actually see.
All right.
Whereas the user experience is how you feel about it. It's how the information is structured together. It's whether it's logical and how it flows from one place to the next. So they are separate, but they do influence each other quite well. For instance, it doesn't help you have a stunningly, beautifully designed interface, but no one can figure out where the buttons are or what they do or how to get to the next page. And on the converse, it doesn't help you have something that's beautifully designed in terms of experience. So it makes perfect logical sense where to find the information, etc., etc. But it's really ugly and it looks like a Windows 95 design.
It's in two websites.
Yes. And it's outdated and you don't like it. It's gross. You don't want to interact with it. So that doesn't help. Yeah. So the two need to work together to actually create a good experience.
I know you don't have anything to do with the ads that are created, but in terms of landing pages, are you also there active creating a landing page for a certain, call it an ad? I know they set up the ad, but where they go to land. So is it recommendable rather to create a landing page for a specific, whichever they want the action to be, let's say it's a product or a new service being provided, or would you rather use your current website as existing and take one of those pages and implement it into the ad for them to land on, which would be better?
So you're talking about creating a microsite potentially instead of using the main site?
Yes.
So I used to work in advertising, so I dealt with all of those things, quite a bit. So I do have that background. And I mean, back in like the 2010s, it was like the thing to create microsites. If you had a specific promotion to run or something like that, which would be a different URL, a different website from your actual main website. So we did this, I don't know if I can mention brands or clients.
Yeah.
So for Wimpy, for instance, so when they had a new promo launching that had like a game involved, we would create a microsite for them. But nowadays, especially with how Google's SEO works, so search engine optimization, where you actually want to drive people to one central site, it is a lot more common for people to try and put everything on the same main domain. So you would have your main website, and then you would have that specific promo or service that you're launching as a sub-site, which means that if people are going through to that link, clicking on your promo, wherever they might have seen the ad, it takes them to your actual site, which then increases your Google rankings.
Yes.
Because as we know, Google's pretty important in order to actually get your business visible.
Yes.
So definitely preferable to keep it on the same domain, but that's more for technical reasons than it is, anything to do with design.
Okay.
But yes, all those things tie in together in the end.
And then so you would say it's on the same domain but a different page.
Yes. So I mean, you can definitely also do like a homepage takeover if you want to. If you're launching a completely new product or service, a lot of companies do this. If they have like new clothes coming out or a new burger coming out or whatever it might be, they'll have, like big ad space on the front page and they'll take it over. And that's perfectly fine. As long as people can still navigate to other pages on your website. Because remember, they might not necessarily just be there for this promo or this new thing that you've launched. They might be interested in something else that you have. So yeah, I think that's the wonderful thing about digital is it's very versatile and you can change it pretty easily. So change your homepage, put your new services on there. If you find that it's not working and if you find that people aren't responding to it the way you want it to, you change it.
Yes.
We often do A/B testing. So you have a version A and you have a version B. Launch them at the same time and different people see different versions. And then you can see how people react. So maybe on the one you have a full-page homepage takeover that just advertises your new product or service. And on the other one, you have your regular one with just a small banner. And you can see which one generates the most leads. You can look at your analytics and see what's working the best. And then you can change the one or the other. So that's the wonderful thing about digital. It's something that you can change quite easily.
How does user research play a role in understanding the user preference and how that shapes the user base in the design and interface and how people experience the customer journey?
So I think research is probably my favorite part of the whole process. The research you're doing is in order to understand the actual people that you're designing for. So the sort of big tenet that underpins what we do is human-centered design. And it sounds fancy. What it comes down to is you're designing for people and you're designing for real people. So you're not just designing for these fictional consumers that you have somewhere in the corner of your mind or fictional users. You're designing for real people. So it's important to go out and have interviews with the people that will be using your product or your service so that you can get those views firsthand. I've had it so many times with projects where I'll interview people that are potential users for the product that we are launching. And I learned so many things that I didn't realize, or people are using things in ways that I never would have thought of because I'm not designing for myself. Most of the time, I'm nowhere near the target market that I'm designing for, and yet I need to create that solution for people to use. So it's important for me to understand their mindset. At the moment, for instance, I'm working on a product for diabetics to try and help them track their diabetes and help to manage their care. I'm not diabetic. I don't understand everything that goes into it. So it's very important for me to do that research so that I can actually accurately design for them. So there's different points of user research. So there's pre-interviews, so before you're actually creating a solution so that you can talk to people, understand what it is that they need from the product. Then also after you've actually created a first version, you go back to those people, all different people, and you ask them, interact with this. So that's then user tasting. So tasting the solution with people, and they might go like, oh, yes, this makes sense. Or they would say, oh, I would never do it this way. You're like, oh, okay. And you take that and you go back to the drawing board, and it's very helpful to understand how people would or wouldn't interact with it. And it is truly amazing with things that people will do with your designs. You will put a giant button there that says enter, and no one will find it.
Cool.
And there is no logical reason. You just know that you have to redesign it. So somewhere you've done something wrong. So yes, the research part, it influences the end results of what the interface is a lot. Because if you're just designing fictional people, you're designing for sort of an ideal case, which doesn't exist. We're human, and human behavior is super unpredictable. So you might think the logical thing to do would be X, Y, and Z. But those assumptions are going to cause you to end up with designs that are not actually ideal for what people want to do. And the fact of the matter is, in any industry that you're in, there are many competitors that are doing similar things. And the reason why people want to use you over your competitors is because you have a better user experience. They like using your product. And if they can't do what they need to or want to with your product, they're going to go to a competitor.
Yes.
So it's really important to listen to the people that you're designing for and actually incorporate their feedback. Not necessarily every single thing, because people can have some weird ideas, but you filter it out and you see, okay, this is completely an outlier, but we'll keep it in mind. But very often you'll see patterns emerge, things that you didn't realize or that you weren't aware of, and then you can take those themes and put it into. So, for instance, in banking, like transferring international funds, you might find that a lot of people use that to pay their family that lives in Africa. So that was for a previous project that I worked on. So their big thing was they were doing this for family. It's not just that they're paying for a holiday house in America or whatever it might be. And that changes the way that you talk to them slightly, because they're doing this from a place of compassion, and they're doing this with family in mind. So it changes the way that you approach it. So things like that, it just helps you to frame the way that you're approaching things slightly differently.
The user research that you do, the people that you find, it's a two-part question. Is one, how do you find the people? And the second question is, how do you ask them what they want if it's something new? They don't have an idea. So if you're creating a new banking app for Bank Zero, how would they tell you how they want it if they've never seen it before?
So I'm going to answer the second part first. So there's a saying, I don't even know if this is a real saying, but there's a saying often used in our industry, a quote by Henry Ford, that says that if I asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So it's exactly the same principle. People don't know what they don't know. So you can't ask someone, what do you want us to put in this app? Honestly, it's a bit lazy, because you're expecting people to do the work for you. So the way that you do approach it, if you are, for instance, creating a new banking app, you don't ask them what features do you want to see. You try and find out what is their thinking and approach to banking in general. So you ask them questions like, what do you value when in a bank account? So is it transparency? Is it trustworthiness? Is it low banking fees? Is it being able to reach someone 24/7? Those kinds of things. So what values are important to you? You ask them about their current habits. So how do you currently keep track of your spending? Do you have a budgeting tool? Things like that. So you don't actually ask them to create the solution for you. You ask them questions around what their current behavior is, or if it is something completely new that has never existed, like when Facebook launched the first time. Well, there was MySpace, but they added lots of other things. They couldn't necessarily go around, because in that case, you also have the issue that they don't want to actually let people know that this is a new thing coming out. So there it becomes a bit harder. You might sort of just create it in secret and launch it, and then you build on it as you get feedback. But in general, you can't ask people, what would you like, or what would you like to see? But what you can do, if you have an existing product, or even a new product, we call them user journeys. So and user journey mapping specifically. So you would try and find out, okay, how do people go about? If I want to book a ticket to go and see a movie, first I think, I want to go and see a movie. Where should I go and find information? It's not 1990 anymore, so I don't look it up in the newspaper. So I will go to a website or an app, and then I need to think, or maybe I Google the movie's name, and then I see what's close to me. There are multiple ways that you can go about it. So a company needs to think, okay, where can I make sure that people are funneled to my site? And then once you get there, how do you get them to actually, go ahead and buy? Because then you need to think about seat selection, and do I want snacks, and all sorts of things like that. So you need to make it easy for people and anticipate what they need. So if you have an existing journey, you can look at, okay, what is it that we do? And then you can also go and ask customer who has booked this, how do they currently experience it? Because it's very funny how often the business people, the executives, how they think their process currently works, how it technically should work, versus how people experience it. And I think if we think of booking movie tickets, we all know that can be a wonderfully painful thing. So it's important to understand where the theoretical, what it should be, is different from the reality. Yeah. So, and then from there you can learn, okay, people are frustrated because it's not clear how I do this part or this part, and then you work on that. Whereas if you're building a new thing, which in my company we are at the moment, we're sitting and we're working out, okay, what do we think this ideal journey should look like? Then once we've done that, like I said, we're looking at diabetics. So we are going to interview a couple of diabetics and then get their input. So show them the designs and walk them through it and understand, but would this satisfy their needs? Are there things that are missing, etc.? We're obviously also working with medical doctors and other healthcare providers because we need that technical input. But your other question was how to find those people. There are companies that specialize in that. And it's hard because if you're looking at, for instance, insurance, you can have different groups of people that aren't insured, people that are insured for a very high premium, that are insured for low premium, people that want to get insurance, people that don't want to get insurance. And it's kind of important to get input from all of those different groups because all of them have different needs and different things that are going to hook them. But in general, the short answer is it's hard to find participants. You generally have to pay them. No one is going to spend an hour or two helping you out of the goodness of their heart, unless it's, very specifically something that's very close to their heart. For instance, something to do with medical care or so on, someone who's an advocate for it. But there are companies that specialize in it. I cannot remember their names right now. Some of the bigger companies like NetBank Discovery, they have their own in-house sourcing departments as well. So you, as a designer, you would write a brief to them and say, I need 6 people aged 18 to 35 that are, busy with, currently do international transfers, and I would like to do the study in 3 weeks' time. So then they would source the people and find the right people for you. But trying to do that on your own, it can become quite tricky.
Yes, I think it does.
Yes.
Just another thing that I want to ask you, what you mentioned was you can, if you have an existing product, you can ask your clients that went through the journey how they experienced it. And a question that I have is, if you ask someone, how was the app, for instance, they said, no, if it was fine or it's a bit frustrating, and you ask them what frustrated you, it's most answers of, not quite sure, and those people that doesn't give point. Is there a way to get past that, a set of questions that you can work towards finding deep dive, to finding out what really is the problem for what frustrates them?
People in general don't like giving negative feedback. So don't get me wrong, you'll always have a very vocal minority that will very happily tell you every single thing that's wrong, which is good and helpful. But in general, people don't want to, rock the boat. So when we do those sorts of user interviews, we try and do them in person. Now, there's different ways of doing it. You can do it in person or you can do it in an online questionnaire. The in-person one's a bit more intensive and more expensive because you need to pay those people. But then you can sit with them and you would give them a task. So you would tell them, go and find these shoes and check them out, or, put them in your basket and then try and pay for them. And then you ask them to think out loud every step of the way, and you're sitting next to them. So they get to the homepage and they're like, oh, wow, this is really nice. I like the colors. And they're like, okay, but where's the search bar? I'm not quite sure where the search bar is. Like, oh, there it is. Okay, I click on the search bar, type in the name of the shoes. Like, oh, it's not giving me the right answer. Like, did I misspell it? So they'll verbally tell you every step of the way. So that way you can pinpoint exactly how they're feeling and what they're thinking at every point of the way. So minor things that they might not think were confusing, whatever, afterwards, in that moment, you can see that, oh, they're not entirely sure or they're not quite confident about what to do. So that really helps. The other way of doing it, a questionnaire afterwards, I'm sure you've all seen this on a website or so on. They'll ask you afterwards, like, do you want to tell us a bit more? And the problem is sometimes people can't remember. They're like, they weren't crazy about the experience today, but they're not entirely sure. If they do remember, then it's helpful. If they don't, then so be it.
Yeah.
But those things tend to be quite useful because they're not intrusive and they're very cheap. So you can just quickly implement that and get a lot of feedback, hopefully. but it doesn't focus on the minute details quite as much.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining in today. Liz, thanks for being with us here. We really appreciate your input. I think it helps a lot. Very insightful. Yeah, so till next time, we'll see you guys again. Cheers.
Thanks so much, guys.
Say. Say. Perfect.